Just after midnight on August 28, 1984, neighbours on Finchley Road in Ipswich noticed something terrifying. Thick black smoke was pouring from the front door of number 87. When they rushed inside to help, what they found would haunt this quiet English town for over 4 decades. 87-year-old Edna Harvey lay dead on her burning mattress. She had been brutally assaulted and strangled before her killer set her bed ablaze in a desperate attempt to destroy the evidence. But here's what makes this case even more chilling. Edna was nearly blind, living alone, and owned nothing of real value. So why did someone want her dead? Welcome to one of Suffolk's most disturbing unsolved murders, a case that's taken on new significance following recent breakthroughs in similar cold cases. I'm about to take you inside a mystery that's baffled investigators for 40 years and reveal why police are now frantically reviewing this case with fresh eyes. Edna Mary Ann Harvey was born in 1897 when Queen Victoria still ruled Britain. By 1984, she had lived through 2 world wars, the rise and fall of the British Empire, and countless changes to the world around her. But nothing could have prepared her for what would happen on that August night. Edna lived a quiet, reclusive life in her ground-floor flat on Finchley Road. Her eyesight had deteriorated so badly that she rarely left her home. She had no expensive jewelry, no valuable antiques, no hidden fortune. She was simply an elderly woman trying to live out her final years in peace. The evening of August 27, 1984, was a typical bank holiday Monday in Ipswich. Families were enjoying the last moments of their long weekend, completely unaware that just streets away, something horrific was about to unfold. Police believe the killer broke into Edna's home sometime during the late evening hours. But here's where this case becomes truly puzzling. The intruder didn't just take what they wanted and leave. They encountered Edna, and what happened next suggests either panic or something far more calculated. Edna Harvey fought for her life that night. The physical evidence shows she was assaulted before being strangled to death, but the killer wasn't finished. In what investigators describe as either a panic move or an attempt to cover their tracks, they set Edna's mattress on fire with her body still on it. The flames began consuming everything. The smoke grew thicker and thicker until it started seeping under doors and through cracks. That's when Edna's neighbors noticed something was wrong. Picture this scene. It's just past midnight. Most of Finchley Road is asleep, but the acrid smell of smoke and the sight of it billowing from Edna's front door sends neighbors into immediate action. They don't hesitate. They don't wait for emergency services. They rush into that smoke-filled flat to try and save their elderly neighbor, but they were too late. The smoke was too thick, the fire too intense. Edna Harvey was already dead, and her killer had vanished into the night. When police arrived at the scene, they immediately recognized this wasn't a typical house fire. The evidence of a break-in was clear. The signs of a struggle were obvious, and most importantly, Edna's injuries told a story of violence that had nothing to do with smoke or flames. Detective Superintendent John Harvey, who led the initial murder investigation, made a crucial observation. He told reporters that this wasn't the work of a professional criminal. The killer had panicked. They hadn't gone into that flat with the intention of murdering anyone or setting the place on fire. But if this was truly a burglary gone wrong, why kill an elderly, nearly blind woman who posed no real threat? Why not just push her aside and take whatever they wanted? Why the brutal assault? Why the strangulation? And most puzzling of all, why the fire? The investigation that followed was massive. Suffolk Police arrested several known offenders in the area. They collected forensic evidence from every inch of Edna's flat. They interviewed hundreds of people. They followed up on countless tips and leads, but none of it led anywhere. Every suspect had an alibi. Every piece of evidence hit a dead end. Every witness account failed to provide the breakthrough investigators desperately needed. In 1998, 14 years after his mother's murder, Edna's son Bob Harvey spoke to local newspapers about the case. His words were heartbreaking. He said he felt the chances of justice being done were slim due to the passage of time since his frail mother's brutal and cowardly murder. Bob Harvey was right to be pessimistic. As the years passed, the case grew colder. Physical evidence deteriorated. Witnesses passed away. The world moved on, but the questions remained. However, in 2014, something changed. The joint Norfolk and Suffolk Major Investigation Team decided to take another look at Edna's case. They had access to forensic technology that simply didn't exist in 1984. DNA analysis had revolutionized criminal investigations. Could modern science finally solve this 4-decade-old mystery? The team analyzed every piece of physical evidence they could find. They used advanced techniques to search for traces of DNA that might have been missed in the original investigation. They were hopeful that after 30 years, they finally had the tools to catch Edna's killer. But once again, their efforts yielded nothing. No new DNA profiles, no fresh leads, no breakthrough that would bring justice for Edna Harvey. By 2019, on the 35th anniversary of Edna's murder, police were still making public appeals for information. Andy Guy, the Major Crime Review and Unsolved Case Manager, told the media that they would never stop looking for Edna's killer. He emphasized that it was never too late for people to come forward with information. But that appeal, like so many before it, produced no significant new leads. Edna Harvey's case seemed destined to remain one of Suffolk's most frustrating unsolved murders, until something extraordinary happened in November 2024. Something that would change everything and bring Edna's case roaring back into the spotlight. The investigation into Edna Harvey's murder was unlike anything Suffolk Police had seen before. Within hours of discovering her body, detectives knew they were dealing with something far more sinister than a simple burglary gone wrong. The crime scene told a disturbing story. Evidence showed that Edna's flat had been systematically searched. Drawers had been pulled open, belongings scattered, but nothing of significant value appeared to be missing. This wasn't the work of a desperate drug addict looking for quick cash. This was something else entirely. Detective Superintendent John Harvey, who led the investigation, made a chilling observation that would haunt the case for decades. He told reporters that the killer wasn't a professional criminal. They had panicked. But if panic was the motive, why the extreme violence? Why strangle an elderly, nearly blind woman who posed no physical threat whatsoever? The forensic evidence painted a picture of a struggle that lasted longer than it should have. Edna Harvey, despite her age and frailty, had fought for her life. The positioning of her body, the state of the room, the injuries she sustained, all pointed to a prolonged and violent encounter. But here's what made investigators' blood run cold. The fire wasn't started immediately after the murder. The evidence suggested that Edna's killer had remained in the flat for some time after strangling her. They had continued searching through her belongings, apparently looking for something specific, before finally setting the mattress ablaze. What were they looking for? What could an 87-year-old recluse possibly have had that was worth killing for? Edna Harvey lived on a modest pension. Her flat was small and sparsely furnished. She owned no expensive jewelry, no valuable artwork, no hidden stash of money. Her most valuable possession was probably her small television set. Yet someone had methodically searched every inch of her home. The timeline of events became crucial to the investigation. Neighbors reported that they hadn't seen Edna for several days before her body was discovered. Given her reclusive nature, this wasn't immediately concerning, but it meant that the murder could have happened days earlier than initially thought. Police canvassed the entire neighborhood, speaking to every resident on Finchley Road and the surrounding streets. They were looking for anyone who had seen something unusual, heard strange noises, or noticed unfamiliar faces in the area during the days leading up to the discovery of Edna's body. What emerged was a disturbing pattern. Several elderly residents reported feeling uneasy in the weeks before Edna's murder. There had been reports of someone trying door handles, checking windows, and lurking around properties where elderly people lived alone. Mrs. Dorothy Williams, who lived 3 streets away, told police that she had seen a man walking slowly past her house multiple times in the days before Edna's murder. He appeared to be studying the properties, noting which ones showed signs of elderly occupants living alone. Milk bottles left out too long, newspapers piling up, lights that followed predictable patterns. This suggested that Edna Harvey wasn't a random victim. She had been specifically targeted. But why her? What made her stand out to a killer who seemed to be hunting elderly women living alone? The investigation expanded rapidly. Suffolk Police brought in additional detectives from neighboring forces. They set up a dedicated incident room and began the painstaking process of tracking down every lead, no matter how small. One of the most promising early leads came from a local taxi driver. He reported dropping off a passenger near Finchley Road on the night police believed Edna was murdered. The passenger was a middle-aged man who seemed nervous and kept looking around as if he was worried about being seen. But when police tracked down the fare, it turned out to be a relative visiting a family member. Another dead end in a case that seemed to be full of them. The forensic analysis of Edna's flat took weeks to complete. In 1984, DNA testing was in its infancy and wasn't routinely used in criminal investigations. Instead, police relied on fingerprints, blood typing, and fiber analysis. Several unidentified fingerprints were found in Edna's flat, but when run through the national database, they didn't match any known criminals. Blood samples were collected and analyzed, but the technology of the time could only determine basic blood types, not specific DNA profiles. The most frustrating aspect of the investigation was the lack of witnesses to the actual crime. Finchley Road was a quiet residential street where neighbors generally minded their own business. The houses were close enough that someone should have heard something, but no one reported hearing screams or sounds of a struggle. This led investigators to consider a chilling possibility. Had Edna known her attacker? Had she let them into her flat willingly? Given her poor eyesight and reclusive nature, it would have been easy for someone to trick their way inside by claiming to be a utility worker, social services representative, or even a concerned neighbor. If you're captivated by how these complex investigations unfold and want to see how detectives piece together these puzzles, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. We're about to reveal some shocking developments in this case that will completely change how you think about this murder. The search for Edna's killer expanded beyond Ipswich. Police contacted forces across the country, looking for similar crimes with the same method of operation. They were particularly interested in cases involving elderly victims, home invasions, and the use of fire to destroy evidence. What they discovered was troubling. There had been a series of attacks on elderly women across Suffolk and neighboring counties in the months leading up to Edna's murder. Most had survived their ordeals, but the pattern was escalating in violence. In March 1984, an 82-year-old woman in Felixstowe had been attacked in her home by an intruder who had ransacked her property before fleeing. In June, a 79-year-old woman in Colchester reported that someone had broken into her house and assaulted her while demanding to know where she kept her valuables. The descriptions from these earlier attacks were frustratingly vague. The attacker was described as a middle-aged man of average height and build. He spoke with a local accent and seemed to know the areas well. But beyond these basic details, witnesses couldn't provide much more information. Police began to theorize that they were dealing with a serial offender who was specifically targeting elderly women. Someone who had been escalating from burglary to assault to ultimately murder. But then, just as the investigation seemed to be gaining momentum, the attacks stopped. After Edna Harvey's murder, there were no more reports of similar crimes in the area. It was as if the perpetrator had either moved away, been arrested for something else, or had satisfied whatever twisted need had driven them to kill. Months passed without a breakthrough. The incident room was scaled down. Detectives were reassigned to other cases. The media attention faded. But Edna Harvey's family never gave up hope that justice would eventually be served. By 1985, 1 year after Edna Harvey's brutal murder, the case had officially gone cold. The dedicated incident room was closed. The team of investigators was disbanded. But the evidence, carefully catalogued and stored, remained in police custody, waiting for the day when technology might finally unlock its secrets. For Edna's family, this transition from active investigation to cold case was devastating. Her son Bob Harvey struggled with the reality that his mother's killer was walking free, potentially living a normal life. while his family lived with the trauma of her violent death. Bob Harvey later told reporters that the hardest part wasn't just the loss of his mother, but the way she had died. Edna Harvey had survived the London Blitz during World War II. She had lived through rationing, economic hardship, and the loss of her husband. She had endured so much throughout her long life, only to be murdered in the place where she should have felt safest. The years that followed brought periodic reviews of the case. In 1989, 5 years after the murder, Suffolk Police conducted a comprehensive review of all the evidence. They re-interviewed key witnesses, re-examined the forensic materials, and considered new investigative techniques that had become available. Nothing came of it. In 1994, 10 years after Edna's death, another review was conducted. By this time, DNA analysis was becoming more sophisticated and widely used in criminal investigations. Police hoped that genetic material collected from the crime scene in 1984 might finally yield results. The problem was that DNA testing in the early 1990s still required relatively large samples of biological material. The traces of evidence collected from Edna's flat were too small or too degraded to produce reliable results with the technology available at the time. Another dead end. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Edna Harvey's case remained in the files, but it wasn't actively investigated. Police resources were limited, and priority had to be given to current crimes and cases where there was a realistic chance of achieving a breakthrough. But the case never truly disappeared. Every few years, it would surface in local media. Journalists would write anniversary pieces marking another year without justice for Edna. These articles always included appeals for information and reminders that it was never too late for witnesses to come forward. The breakthrough everyone had been hoping for seemed to come in 2009. Advances in DNA technology had reached the point where scientists could extract genetic profiles from increasingly small and degraded samples. Suffolk Police decided it was time for another review of Edna Harvey's case. The remaining physical evidence was sent to specialized laboratories for analysis using the most advanced techniques available. Forensic scientists worked for months, using cutting-edge equipment to search for traces of DNA that previous analyses had missed. The results were heartbreaking. While the new technology was indeed more sensitive than anything previously available, the combination of time, environmental damage, and the fire that had consumed much of the crime scene had destroyed most of the biological evidence. Some partial DNA profiles were recovered, but they were incomplete and couldn't be matched to any individuals in the national database. Once again, Edna Harvey's family was left without answers. In 2014, 30 years after the murder, the joint Norfolk and Suffolk Major Investigation Team conducted what they described as their most comprehensive review yet of the Edna Harvey case. This time, they had access to DNA technology that was exponentially more powerful than anything used in previous reviews. Detective Inspector Eamon Bridger, who led this review, was optimistic. He told the media that they were using advances in technology to establish who murdered Edna, and that they believed someone in the community held vital information about the crime. The team re-examined every piece of physical evidence that had been collected in 1984. They used new fingerprint analysis techniques to enhance partial prints that had been considered unusable 3 decades earlier. They employed advanced fiber analysis to study trace materials found at the scene. Most importantly, they applied the latest DNA extraction and amplification techniques to biological samples that had been stored since 1984. The hope was that even microscopic traces of the killer's DNA might still be recoverable after all these years. But once again, despite months of painstaking work and the use of the most advanced forensic technology available, the review yielded no positive results. The passage of time and the damage caused by the fire had simply been too great. Detective Inspector Bridger's public statement following this failed review was both determined and somber. He emphasized that this was a tragic case where a frail elderly lady was attacked in her home, and that police would never stop looking for her killer. But privately, investigators were beginning to accept that the Edna Harvey case might never be solved through traditional forensic methods. Too much evidence had been destroyed. Too much time had passed. Too many potential witnesses had died. In 2019, 35 years after Edna's murder, Suffolk Police made another public appeal for information. Andy Guy, the major crime review and unsolved case manager, held a press conference on the anniversary of the killing. His message was clear, but tinged with frustration. He told the assembled journalists that they were convinced someone either knew who was responsible for this horrific crime or held a vital clue they hadn't yet shared with police. He emphasized that it was never too late for people to come forward. The appeal generated some media attention, but no significant new leads. The few tips that came in were thoroughly investigated, but none provided the breakthrough that investigators desperately needed. And then, in November 2024, something extraordinary happened that would bring new hope to dozens of cold cases across Suffolk, including Edna Harvey's murder. A 92-year-old man named Ryland Headley was arrested for the 1967 rape and murder of 75-year-old Louisa Dunn in Bristol. The arrest came after a cold case review that used advanced DNA technology to solve what was believed to be Britain's longest-running unsolved murder case. But here's what makes this arrest significant for other cold cases. Headley had been living in Ipswich since the early 1970s. He had previously been convicted of raping 2 elderly women in Ipswich in 1977. His pattern of targeting elderly victims in their homes was exactly the kind of methodology seen in several unsolved Suffolk murders, including Edna Harvey's case. Following Headley's conviction for the Louisa Dunn murder, Suffolk Police announced that they would be conducting extensive inquiries into his activities since he moved to Ipswich in the early 1970s. While they couldn't comment on specific cases, they confirmed that several unsolved murders and rapes involving elderly women would be reviewed for potential connections. For the first time in decades, there was genuine hope that Edna Harvey's case might finally see movement. Not because of new evidence from her crime scene, but because of potential connections to a perpetrator who had finally been caught for a similar crime. If you've been following this incredible story and want to stay updated on any developments in these cold cases, you absolutely need to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Cases like this show us that justice might be delayed, but it's never truly impossible. The reality is that Edna Harvey's killer may never be definitively identified. 40 years is a long time in any murder investigation. Physical evidence degrades, witnesses pass away, and memories fade. But what the recent breakthrough in the Louisa Dunn case proves is that even the coldest cases can suddenly become hot again. Modern forensic science continues to evolve at an incredible pace. Techniques that didn't exist 5 years ago are now routine parts of criminal investigations. DNA analysis that required large samples in the 1990s can now work with invisible traces of genetic material. More importantly, national DNA databases continue to grow. Every day, new profiles are added as people are arrested for various offenses. Someone who committed a crime in 1984 and managed to avoid detection for 40 years might finally be caught because they were arrested for something completely unrelated in 2024. The Edna Harvey case remains officially open. Her file sits in the Suffolk Police Cold Case Unit, waiting for that crucial piece of information that could finally solve this 4-decade-old mystery. Somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to Edna Harvey on that August night in 1984. Whether it's the killer themselves, someone who suspected a family member or neighbor, or someone who witnessed something suspicious but never reported it, that information still exists. Edna Harvey deserves justice. She deserves to have her killer identified and held accountable for the brutal way her life ended. Her family deserves answers, and the community of Ipswich deserves to know that this case hasn't been forgotten. Until that day comes, Edna Harvey's murder stands as a reminder that some crimes leave scars that never fully heal. Some questions demand answers, no matter how much time has passed. And some victims deserve to have their stories told, again and again, until justice is finally served. The investigation continues, The hope for answers remains, and the search for Edna Harvey's killer goes on.